Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Cloud Storage and Backup Recovery Summit. Today's event was organized by the hardworking folks at AWS Insider and Virtualization and Cloud Review, who brought together some of the best independent experts on today's topic. Many thanks to our sponsors, Clumio, Metallic, and Faction for making this event possible. And thanks to you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for the first of 3 information-packed sessions. But before we get started, I need to go over a few housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our best to get to all of them. Our sponsors have provided some extra resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to check those out. At the end of the summit, you'll be asked to take a very short survey. Please take just a moment to share your honest opinions with us. Our editors read every comment, and they help to shape our future events. And last but not least, at the end of our 3rd session, one lucky attendee will be receiving one of our very best prizes yet, a 13-inch MacBook Pro with the Apple M1 processor and 2 terabytes of storage. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. Now let's get to our first session, our top 10 cloud infrastructure best practices for storage, backup, and recovery. For this session, we've called on 2 experts in the field, Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricoin Elite Consulting, and John O'Neill, Sr., Chief Technologist at AWS Solutions. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with more than 20 years of experience in the IT industry. His background includes data communications, networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. John has also worked in IT for about 2 decades, more than 2 decades. His roles have ranged from software architect to senior executive, consultant to author. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He's developed technology training courseware for Pluralsight and authored material for both Thomson Reuters Aspitor books and Exec Blueprints. Both of our presenters are sought-after speakers, and I know you're in for a great session. Take it away, Dave and John.
Awesome. Thank you very much, John, for the warm introduction. I know that John and I are so pleased to be here for this particular session. We do so much work in the backup and recovery space, so when the opportunity came up for us to speak at this event, I know we were really excited because, John Sr., I think that when we look at this particular topic, it's interesting because it changes very quickly with the landscape that's out there, especially in regards to cybersecurity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that we see so often is that there's this misconception that backup and recovery and DR in general are kind of stable and they really haven't changed or whatever, and that couldn't be farther from the truth. We have to be very agile in re-architecting these solutions almost constantly to address the way that businesses and organizations are leveraging the cloud, leveraging remote workforces, all those different kind of things.
Awesome. Well, should we get the show started here, John? I think so. So our first session that we're going to go through, we're going to cover the top 10 items for, the best practice for cloud storage, backup, and recovery. But also, towards the end of the session, we're going to do a live Q&A. So we're going to make sure that we leave some time towards the end of the session for some live Q&A. So inside of your viewer panel for the audience, there's an opportunity for you to post your questions in there. We're going to try to get to absolutely as many as we can going through towards the end of the session. So just make sure you're asking questions and we'll pick them up at the end. All right, John, item number 1, a very important word for us to understand when it comes to backup and recovery, and this is the word immutability. And for me, the word immutability is really synonymous with ransomware and threat actors trying to attack our infrastructure. And for me, this one's really important because when I look at an organization that's been compromised, that's the victim of a ransomware attack, I know that both of us have had the opportunity to be members of several ransomware recovery teams over the course of the past last 12 months. And one of the things that we find is that the first thing that the bad guys are going to go after is your ability to recover, because if they can cripple your ability to recover, then the amounts, the monetary values that they're holding you hostage for are going to be that much more real to your organization, because you can't just go to your backup team saying, hey, can you just restore the SQL server from last night? Hey, can you just go, restore our SAP environment? No, you can't, because, if they got all of your backups, that's a problem. So with storage immutability, the theory behind this is that, we want to have a backup that is immune to that. And you can think of it as simple as just having something that's got its own level of encryption, that's got its own level of separate passwords. But that in essence is what it is. So what are your thoughts, John, surrounding, storage immutability for our backup targets?
Well, it's straight on just what you said, right? Immutability is the state of being immune or unchangeable, and you really have to have a backup that exists in that state to be able to fend off these attacks that are out there. And one of the things that unfortunately a lot of IT pros I interact with still bring up is, the concept that a lot of attacks are, just born out of we just want to see if we can actually do this. We want to extract some information and then we go our separate ways, that kind of thing. But that really isn't what the landscape is now. Over the last couple of years, with security events being state-sponsored, so sponsored by large governments, that sort of thing, with ransomware becoming a prevalent mechanism for these organizations, these criminal enterprises, as well as those that are funded by nation states to make money, the penetration aspect is low on the likelihood for reasons that you have a ransomware event or a malware infection. And therefore, they absolutely want to do just what you said, Dave. They want to get in and they want to corrupt your ability to recover, because if you can recover, then really it was just an exercise in seeing if they could pull it off, right? Because you're going to go to your backup team, your DR team, they're going to restore your backup, you're going to rebuild a little bit of data or transactions that you have to, because there was, the gap between when you last did a backup and then your current time. So looking at your recovery point objective, that kind of thing, and you move on, right? It's not a high cost event, and that isn't what we're seeing out there right now. What we're seeing is that malware lives in organizations for 45 plus days before it's detected, and over that time, one of the big things that it is doing, besides trying to spread as far as it can, is getting control and changing your backup state so that you cannot recover. And, most organizations, even if you have a backup that goes beyond that 45 days or whatnot, the cost to your organization to rebuild 45 days worth of transactional stuff is usually far more than just the ransom.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those viewers that we have, John, that are, looking at this as part of their backup strategy and say, listen, I don't even know where to start. Some of the options that are available for them right now is that cloud providers offer immutable cloud storage. So you have to make sure that you do some research for your cloud vendors that are out there, so we can ship our backups up to the cloud and get them immutable. So that's good. But what if we wanted to have a local copy of that? Could we take something as simple as backing up all of our core infrastructure? Let's say you're a smaller organization. Maybe you've got 20 to 50 virtual machines, something like that. They would probably all fit on some type of a NAS appliance. So in essence, the concept of, having dark storage, the concept of, and I hate to use this word tapes because that was a long time ago for me and I thought we were done with this, but, the ability to take and have something that's not connected to the network and offline is technically immutable because you're not able to touch it, you're not able to change it, you're not able to modify it. And so I find a lot of organizations are having a tiered approach to immutability because they want to have a local recovery option as well as a cloud recovery option. We'll talk more about some cloud recovery stuff as we come up, but what a great topic to kind of kick things off. All right, so let's take a look at topic number 2. I'm in charge of the PowerPoint deck, so I get to decide when we go next. Topic number 2, John, is multi-cloud backup in DR. And the real question here is one cloud enough? Should we be looking at, if we're shipping our backups up to a cloud provider, should we be looking at multiple clouds? Should we look at staying in that single cloud or commingling? Are we going to look at potentially staying in the cloud? And what type of availability options are available for our storage accounts that we're storing all of this data in? Do we want to just have local copies? Do we want to have geographically distributed copies? And what's the price point impacts to those? So that's kind of where we'll start with this topic here, and we'll spin the wheel, and you can pick where to start with this one.
Well, I'm just going to start with on-prem to cloud, right? And what we're seeing out there today is that most organizations have some form of hybrid cloud architecture, whether it's multi-cloud or single cloud provider. The fact is that they've got a hybrid coexistence between on-prem resources and cloud resources. And the beauty of that environment is it really does make the concept of a distributed DR strategy or backup strategy and recovery strategy so much simpler, right? Because now, let's look back in history and go to the tape scenario. I noticed one of our attendants, Joshua, threw out there about his collection of DC 6150 tapes. So let's look back into when that was the norm, and you would back up to tape and you take it off site because what if your site was hit by a tornado or a fire or a flood? The sprinkler system decided to go haywire and turn it into a pool that I could scuba dive in, whatever. You wanted something off site. Well, when you have that hybrid infrastructure and you have that ability to be connected to your cloud provider, you don't need to worry about getting a safety deposit box or who's going to take the tapes there when I'm on vacation, that sort of thing. You can actually set it up, schedule it, get it up into your cloud. It's not that expensive. Things like Azure Blob Storage make it very inexpensive to do it. You can take advantage of the cloud provider backup disaster recovery technologies, okay, and use those, or you can just use your own software and strategies and use the cloud as a storage repository. But it certainly does provide you, an easier path than that conventional method. And I know, Dave, you and I have both seen this over time. The easier we make this process, the more likely it is to be followed religiously and not deviated from. And that is a core tenet to successful DR, right? Is you have to do it, and you have to do it over and over in the exact same way.
Yeah, absolutely, John, absolutely. And one of the other really big pieces for setting all of this up as well, and I want to point out something that's been kind of an interesting paradigm that's happened since COVID-19 happened, 18 months ago, was our ability to actually go into the office and get the tapes can be severely hindered because that facility might actually be closed. So if you thought you were just going to go in and grab some offline storage and take it to a different facility or take those backups home, that could be a little bit hamstrung for you just in the states of the global pandemic that we're in. So cloud has just become that much more important to all of the organizations. And one of the big tips around setting up cloud backup in DR is you really need to pay attention to the type of storage that you're buying in the cloud, because they come at different price points. And so, for example, when we take a look at, a locally replicated copy, or LRS, that would basically, if you could think of this in your head, be replicating across 3 different racks inside of a single data center. So if there was a failure in that particular data center, you have a potential of data loss inside of there. But the price point for that is kind of like $1 sign. Whereas when you look at, zone replication or geo replication, geo replications, I think, can store as many as 6 copies of your data, not just 3 copies of your data, but that comes at a very hefty price point. So when configuring your backups going up to the cloud, you need to build that into your architecture to see what type of storage replication is actually required in these cloud data centers. And then the last point here is that should you really even look at having, multiple cloud vendors for your backups? Am I going to be shipping my daily, weekly, monthlies to one cloud? And am I going to be shipping my historical archives over to another cloud? And I think that's really organizationally dependent, depending on how much trust you're putting in that particular cloud vendor. And the way that I look at it is that it's almost like a partnership or a marriage with your cloud provider now. We lose a certain amount of control in, a cloud world where we're used to managing things on-prem and we've got full autonomy and full control. When we work with the cloud providers, we don't have access to the hypervisors. We don't have real back-end access to the storage that's there. It's kind of there, and it's available to us. So you have to put a lot of trust inside of those cloud vendors that you have. So I haven't seen that particular scenario, and that actually came up from one of the pre-questions that we had when putting a presentation together. So I haven't seen that scenario a lot. The scenario that I've seen more of is, trusting kind of that single cloud vendor. All right, on to number 3, John.
Dave, let me throw in one thing that I want to throw out there to everyone. If you haven't thought about it, one of the areas that I see a lot of organizations struggle with is backing up data that people inevitably keep on their workstations, even when they're not supposed to, even when you've redirected folders, even when you've done all those things. Often we run into scenarios where, hey, my laptop was compromised or lost or broken, and I have some files on there that I need. Well, one advantage people can take out is if you have certain Microsoft licensing. So let's say you have M365 E5 licensing. You get quite a bit of storage per user on OneDrive for Business, and it's just provisioned in there. If you transition your users to using that, they get the advantage of the cloud. It's not conventional backup, but that's one of the things that I think we really do excel in is thinking outside the box. And you do still get the protection of having distributed data centers, and it's in the cloud. So if you had to replace the laptop or rebuild the laptop or whatever, you would still be able to get to it and that sort of thing. So it's not a full-blown backup solution, but it's certainly better than just leaving the files on the local drive.
Yeah, for sure. And, as a virtual show of hands for our attendees, John and I love to present in person, so we always like to have the show of hands when we poll the audience for questions. Just a virtual show of hands, you could be sitting at your desk, and your spouses or your better half will come by. Why are you waving at the monitors? But you have gone through that process, right? I hope that really resonates. And one of the other pieces inside of there is there's built-in ransomware protection into OneDrive for Business and OneDrive Personal as well. There's actually a 30-day vault that you can recover from, so that's kind of cool. Now, when we're making our journey up to the cloud, John, there's additional costs that can be incurred, especially in the event that we've got an emergency and need to bring our data back, because both you and I have been involved in. You remember the client, John, where everything was gone. We had an end of days ransomware scenario where the bad guys got in and they got admin access. It was a little bit of sloppy activity from some of our local admins, and we were logging in with domain admin access on workstations. It was a pass-the-hash attack, and it wasn't very pretty for this particular client that we had to come in. because they had pretty much lost everything. And thank goodness they had an immutable cloud copy, John. So that's good that we had mentioned that. But now what do we do with said immutable cloud copy? Well, let's walk through the process of getting our data to the cloud. Getting our data to the cloud is going to go through some type of connectivity that we're going to have. It could either be over a dedicated VPN connection. It could either be taking and going over a straight blob API call where we kind of expose that. Not really as recommended anymore. We want to watch some security as to which IPs can kind of hit that. So we'll always watch your security with your cloud storage accounts. But one of the most interesting pieces for me is that as we go to bring data, or as we go to put data into the cloud, and this is Microsoft specific, and we're pushing data across that VPN to get it there, the ingress cost, and ingress is inbound and ingress is outbound in networking speak, the ingress costs are free. So Microsoft will actually allow you to dump as much data into the cloud across that conduit as you want, but where they're going to get you is outbound. So there is some cost to bringing that outbound. And, what are some of the thoughts around this, John? Just, we've got our data in the cloud now, and, should we maybe leave it there? How long is it going to take to actually get it back? That's a really good question, because we're always being hounded by the business saying, okay, you have this cloud backup solution, bring our data back right now. And you talk to the business saying, well, I have a certain size pipe and I can only bring so much data back at a time. We're going to prioritize which VMs we're going to bring back and which workloads to get everything back up and running. And by the way, that's typically like accounting, payroll, some critical financial systems. Those are typically the first ones that will come back online. What are some of your thoughts around this piece, John?
So this is one of the discussions that I'm so glad we're actually having today, because a lot of folks miss it. It gets overlooked until all of a sudden they get the bill for, the recovery event. That event we talked about, right, was certainly not inexpensive when it came to the end of days scenario for many reasons. But one is this cost. And one area that I look at a lot and go over with customers, clients, that sort of thing, is the area of the VPN SKUs, so specifically in Azure. A lot of them don't realize that the old basic VPN SKU, which they haven't upgraded from because they configured it a number of years ago or whatnot, that was limited to 100 megabits per second, right? And then, just by upgrading and going with the more modern SKUs for the site-to-site VPN or that sort of thing, that can get pumped up to 650. It can get upgraded. You go to SKU 2, I think that's 1,000. And so you can absolutely increase the performance. But the other thing that they don't realize is that, like, the difference between SKU 1 and the old basic SKU cost-wise, the monthly cost-wise, is pretty much even keel. It's the same. So you go from 100 to 650 without anything but a little investment in going in and changing it. So the takeaway here is make sure that even after you set up these connection paths and these virtual networks and gateways and all these things, that you're keeping track of those and you're periodically reviewing them to make sure that you're taking advantage of the most modern configuration, technology, licensing, contracts, that kind of thing, because you may be able to increase performance and have that extra bandwidth without absorbing any cost. I liken this to something I used to deal with earlier in my career many years ago, where I would go in and I would tell people as they were implementing ISDN or DSL in particular, DSL was a big one, they're like, why are all my neighbors running so much faster than I am? Well, because the telephone company never reaches out to tell you that they've increased the capacity and offer different plans. So I would recommend to people, hey, you call in every 6 months and you ask them, and they'd find out, oh, the 5 meg plan costs the same as the 3. Same kind of scenario here. Check and make sure that you're using the current SKUs and licensing that offer you the best bang for your buck when it comes to performance and cost.
Absolutely, and that point that you made about increasing your bandwidth at potentially the same or kind of a negligible cost increase is so important. On multiple occasions, I've contacted the ISPs and let them know that we're in an emergency situation, and is there anything that they can do to dial up our speed? Sometimes it's just a software change. So I can typically go from, let's say I had a 10 meg connection to 100, or from 100 to a gig, and they'll give me that connection. In most cases, I've been able to get it free of charge, no cost to the customer, while we're in the emergency, because it's in the telco's interest to do that anyways, because they want to sell you the bigger service. And it's great that that opportunity is out there. It just takes one phone call. It's something you don't think about. Here's one of the intangibles that you have to think about in regards to potentially getting your data back from the cloud. You could make that phone call, and your ISP could play ball with you, and you could jump your pipe from 100 meg to a gig pipe, which is great, 10x increase. You think, oh, I'm going to bring that data back a lot faster. Check your firewalls. Make sure your firewalls even support that fast of a connection, because your firewall may be limited to a 250 meg connection, and it may not even support it. And your firewall vendors may not play so nicely to give you that software increase, and it could be a real cost bump. So, it depends on how bad and how fast you want to do
yeah, Dave. Heck yeah. Let me jump in, because I just got to reaffirm that I've seen that happen. First off, for those of you that are lucky enough to have fiber-based internet, check with your provider on what your deal is. Most of them can configure it so it is burstable at no cost. So you have a 500 meg plan, it'll burst to a gig automatically. So you can take advantage of that. But as Dave mentioned, I have gone in and looked at scenarios where clients are complaining that, hey, we've got a gig service, but our speed tests are showing, 100 meg or whatnot. They've got the firewall port hard set at 100 meg, right? It's never going to perform better than that. So you need to make sure that all those connections, so, you've got your carrier switch, and it's coming to your firewall, and then you got your firewall to your core switch and that kind of thing. Make sure that those connections are not only capable of supporting the speeds you're paying for, but are configured to support the speeds that you pay for. So I'm glad you brought that point up, Dave.
Perfect. All right, John, let's keep going here. Lots of great information. Backup and recovery to the cloud and ransomware. So the first thing that I'll point out here is that when you're dealing with backup and recovery, there's traditional backup and recovery, and then there's ransomware recovery. They are two distinctly different things. And John, I'll hand this one over to you, because you did some good research with our friends over at KnowBe4 Software, very widely respected in some of their anti-malware and anti-phishing toolkits tools. I believe it's actually Kevin Mitnick's company as well, too, or was at a period in time. And our good friend that we speak at Tech Mentor with occasionally, Roger Dimes, works over there. And so what's the state of ransomware today, John?
Yeah, so thanks, Dave. This is a big one, near and dear to me, because, I consider it a personal mission statement to try and really get organizations protected so that they don't become a victim. I live in a small county. It's physically the biggest county, but population-wise, it's one of the smallest in the state of Ohio. And just in 2021, there have been 4 shutdown-level ransomware events that affected healthcare, affected private companies, affected municipal governments. Okay, and that's in one little county in the state of Ohio. So I guarantee that everyone that's attending this session today, whether they know it or not, someone near them has experienced ransomware. In fact, onto this kind of infographic here, one of the things that we learned and KnowBe4 learned as they did a lot of this research is 55% of the organizations queried paid the ransom. And Dave, better than anyone I know, that just paying the ransom doesn't guarantee that you're back in business, right? There's all those things such as applications. A lot of times, even if the decryption keys work to get you your data, your applications still need reset from scratch. They just don't come back. And that can be a lot of work, particularly if you have something like an SAP implementation that is highly customized. Rebuilding an SAP installation from scratch is not a day-long exercise or even a week-long exercise typically. And while it's down, you're down. So pay attention to ransomware in your area, because, one thing to know is that odds are, if organizations in your city, county, whatever, are getting infected, a lot of your employees, your organization's members, probably are in the contact databases of those companies. So let's look at the healthcare, the hospital system that was ransomed this year here. Everybody in this county, including those that work for, my company and other companies, well, they're probably in those databases. And ransomware, part of the deal is making money from the current infected client, but also getting out and infecting other clients so you can make money from them. So if you don't think they're harvesting data, think again. We know that they are. And if you think that your systems are protected against having the data harvested, I would say, well, many of us probably thought we were protected from getting ransomware in the first place, and that proved untrue. So with ransomware, you really kind of have to take the negative Nelly approach, because that allows you to imagine scenarios that won't conventionally be thought of. And if you can imagine them, you can protect against them. It's usually the thing we don't imagine that opens the door and lets ransomware in. But, to this slide, the costs are real, the impacts are real. And, I have a statement that I share, and I'll kind of close out on this one, Dave. But, and that is that ransomware is not inconvenient. It is destructive. And it doesn't just destroy data and applications and systems. It destroys credibility. It destroys relationships, the relationships between your organization and its partners, your organization and its customers, your organization and its shareholders. It destroys, as I mentioned, the credibility of your IT organization within the organization as a whole. Do you think that your shareholders and stakeholders, how long will it take to get that confidence back from them that you're able to protect against these next level attacks? So you need to take ransomware seriously, and you need to develop a DR strategy, as you mentioned, Dave, that looks at it as a unique scenario. Because if you're depending on your normal disaster recovery backup scenario to protect you from ransomware or recover you from it, it's not going to happen, right? Those scenarios are designed around conventional things like physical disaster, like accidental data deletion, right? That sort of thing. They're not designed to deal with hey, I have this malicious program developed by a group sponsored by a foreign government, which came in and not only destroyed my data, but, encrypted it, made it unresponsive, tried to target my backups, all that kind of thing. So take it serious. Thanks, Dave.
Absolutely. And just like 3 more points that I'm going to add to this is, just because you get the recovery keys does not mean that you're going to be able to recover the application servers themselves. You might get your data back. In about 80% of the cases, the recovery keys have gotten data back for customers that I've worked with. It has not necessarily brought back their application servers. I found that the OS drives were trashed on those, so just heads up. And if you're looking for a number to throw at this with your business, John and I were part of a Kaseya ransomware recovery exercise with an organization that was unfortunately hit in the summer of this year. And the price that they had to pay to recover a single server was $55,000 US. And if they wanted to get the key for the entire company, it was going to be $5 million. So, and that was a small organization of about 200 users. So if you want a cost to throw at this, that's what they go after. And they don't really negotiate that value down. And it's a real process to do that through cyber insurance, which we'll talk about throughout the day here. But yeah, make sure that you stay on your toes with this, John. Really great feedback on that particular one. So I'll start off with the next one here. So when we look at disaster recovery, is it really recovering, or is it going to be a migration to the cloud? Does your organization have an architecture and a roadmap that's saying, hey, listen, you know what, maybe on-prem's not for us. Maybe there's certain workloads that are better suited in the cloud. There's just certain things that you get with running workloads in the cloud. And, I'll speak to some of the new features and some of the innovation that Microsoft provides from an infrastructure as a service perspective. For example, if you run your workloads in the cloud, what will end up happening is that you can take advantage of next-gen features. And for us in the Windows Server space, as Windows Server IT pros, patching has been kind of the bane of our existence for the past 20 years. Multiple reboots, giant cumulative updates, 1.5 gig worth of cumulative updates per server, multiple reboots, 3 potential reboots just to service a server. Well, Microsoft has answered that question by introducing new features such as kernel soft reboots, and I actually saw some demos of this, which were pretty cool, where you would take a traditional server that would be on-prem, and it was a physical server. So we use the example of a physical server that's going through a power-on self-test and things like that, but it would take about 5 minutes to boot that server. With the kernel soft reboot, it was, I think, 6 seconds. So it was a significant difference. So there's certain features that get added into the cloud that may be very, very interesting for organization. And maybe you just want to get out of the data center business altogether. Maybe you want your teams have shrunk and you want to just take advantage of some type of automation. So a recovery event can actually become a little bit of an opportunity for your organization where you can say, hey, listen, on-prem is down. Let's move away from the scary talk of ransomware right now, and let's talk about some natural disasters. We're in smack dab in the middle of hurricane season in the U.S. right now. And it's a reality. You could be talking about sustained power outages for, a month or more at a time with, a large category hurricane coming through. And so even although you may want to turn back on your infrastructure, there may be no capability of doing it. So instead of just recovering to the cloud, maybe we're going to look at a permanent migration to the cloud at this point in time. So yeah, we had some good snapshots. They were moving up, and our replication engine was working well. And we wanted to press that big red button, John, and, we have the ability to do that. So, migrating that up to the cloud becomes kind of a real possibility with this. So I'm going to move on, John. We've still got some Q&A that we have got to go through here as well, too. So we'll move on to the next one here. And let's talk a little bit about outages and outages that do happen. And one particular one that I wanted to chat with you about on this was, are clouds immune to outages? So I just talked about potentially replicating all that infrastructure up to the cloud in the event of a VR scenario. Are clouds immune to outages? Does AWS take outages? Does the other clouds take outages? Does Azure take outages? What's your experience with this, and what can we do as IT pros surrounding this?
So absolutely, outages do happen. There's 2 misconceptions that I see a lot when it comes to this topic and the cloud in particular. So one of those is that going to the cloud ransom-proofs your organization. Just because you're in the cloud, you are not ransom-proof. That's number one. And number 2 is that, I'm in the cloud and I use one of the major providers, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, so I'm prevented from having any outages. We know that's not the case. That's the con. They do happen. What we do know also about those outages, in addition to that they happen, is that the resources deployed when they happen to fix them, to recover from them, are at a scale that any other cloud provider can't match, right? Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they have the ability to deploy resources to identify the source of the problem, root it out, implement resolution at a scale that just isn't going to happen in your on-prem data center or in your local cloud provider for that kind of thing. So they do tend to be lower duration, but they still hurt. So when Office 365, for instance, isn't available and you don't have access to SharePoint sites or OneDrive storage or that kind of thing, it's an outage for your company in the same way that you lost a hyper-converged infrastructure deployment on-prem. You need to be prepared for that. So the whole thing around this is, make sure that you have business continuity plans as part of your backup and recovery, your DR overall strategy, vision, and plan, so that you can tolerate these outages with as little impact as possible.
Fantastic. Thanks, John. All right. So some of the intangibles of a DR system that everyone seems to forget about is the fact that there are ancillary systems that run inside of every one of our organizations. It could be HVAC systems that are controlled by an old Windows NT computer that's sitting in some closet that nobody even knows exists. First of all, do not plug that into the network. Make sure that thing is completely offline and you want to segment that. Aging phone systems. What are you going to do about phone systems? How are you going to get people back online? Maybe you've got an on-prem voice over IP solution. Maybe looking at voice integrated Teams might be a good idea for that. Building entry, plant control systems, things like that. These are all very important intangibles that I find that are often left out of the DR plan. Typically what we look at is our core hypervisors and all the virtual machines that run on there, but we forget about all of the other pieces that allow a business to function. So I know that, John, you're inside of the manufacturing space with your day job. What are some of your thoughts around this? Like, if you took a complete outage and lost the voice over IP solution, what are some of the things that you would look at doing to, bring your organization back online to restore communication?
My thoughts is that I'll begin with this intangible slide. This is one of the things that I consider as one of the big threats to both organization cybersecurity plans or strategies and their backup and recovery, their DR strategies. Perfect example. So recently, we found that some employee clocks, so time clocks, things used to punch in and out and record the date of the day. Of course, they're built on the Android operating system. They were plugged into the network, and nobody has been paying attention to patching that OS or doing anything with it. So you have Android, which is one of the most targeted operating systems out there statistically by malware, right? And it's implemented, it's fully connected to your network. Okay, it's on the same VLAN in this case that the servers live on. So your production ERP system, your accounting system, your HR system, your quality system. And nobody is paying attention to it. Nobody is keeping up with applying security updates or any of those kind of things. It's bad when you're the victim of a malware event. It's worse when you're the victim of a malware event that compromised a system using a breach that was patched by the vendor months and months and months before. I can tell you, as an IT professional, that's one of the hardest ones to explain to your bosses, right? How did you, as the paid IT resource, as the paid IT professional, manage to leave the back door open so long that eventually somebody found it and took advantage of it? And that's what all these intangibles are. They are back doors, okay? You may have that, as Dave mentioned, the HVAC system being run by an NT server, or we see XP machines a lot, okay? So you should be scanning your system, and if you have those systems that have unsupported OSs, particularly, you need to isolate them from your production network. First off, I can tell you that if you have an organization that has to pass any sort of compliance audit that's based on current standards, such as a SOC audit, maybe you're doing one of those, you can't pass that if you have these old operating systems on your network and actually tell the truth and admit to them being there. And it makes sense, right? Because let's look at it from a cybersecurity insurance point of view. Who's going to insure you when you're actually telling them that, hey, I'm running a system that even the vendor doesn't consider secure right now, but I want you to insure me against a security event? Those two things don't jive. So make sure that not only are you keeping your intangible systems to a minimum, but that you're keeping oversight on them. Don't plug things in and forget about them simply because they're not daily drivers, if you will. They're time clocks, they're energy management systems for the the lighting controls. They're a system that lets your electric utility get in and monitor things, whatever they are. If you're not physically isolating them to a different network, which is the best case scenario, air gap them, then you should at least be virtually isolating them through the use of VLANs, firewalling, right? Firewalls both built into the system as well as, using ACLs and policies on your switches, routers, firewalls, that sort of thing.
Awesome. Thanks, John. All right, so we got 3 left, and then we'll do some Q&A here. I'll talk about this one here because this one's really key for all of your organizations. So DR to the cloud, DR on-prem to another data center, DR to another site is all really key. And one of the things that I like to point out is that there's different types of process and documentation surrounding the things that you need to make yourself successful. So number one, a business continuity plan is not a DR plan, all right? A business continuity plan is something that you'll engage with business leadership and finding out how long they can actually sustain outages in particular business units for, and what the recovery process looks like for that. How are they going to bring individuals back to work? Where are they going to go? Is there going to be a business continuity facility that they're going to take and go to if the event that, the primary office is down? They are distinctly different artifacts as part of this process. Second piece is that traditional DR plans are different from cyber DR plans, and they need to be treated as different plans, because the way that you recover from a cyber event like ransomware is not the same as how you would recover from a traditional fire, flood, loss of power grid, things like that. Because in that event, typically the big red button suffices for you in DR plan number one. Press the big red button, fail over, let some orchestration happen, it's good to go. Plan number two has to assume compromise. And when you assume compromise, what's the point of bringing back systems if infected systems are still on the network? You just brought it back and restored it, and now it's infected again. You brought it back, it restored it, it's infected again. Step one as part of that plan is you have to make sure that all of the infections are gone and all the threat actors are actually out of your network. So having some type of advanced threat protection is really key there. And the biggest piece of this is communications. Us in IT, I find this is one of the things that we often struggle with the most is communicating with the business. Make sure that you're communicating this every step of the way, all the way down from your C-suite, down to the IT pros, down to the end users, because they're all part of this process. They're all part of this journey. All right, dedicated links to the cloud. For this one here, and John, I'm going to get you to take the last one for me. So I'll do this one, and then you can take the last one, and we'll leave time for some Q&A. Consider having a dedicated link to the cloud. Vendors like Microsoft offer ExpressRoute direct connections for you. Depending on what type of telco you have, they may offer this as part of their service. You want to investigate this, because maybe part of your journey to the cloud is saying, well, between data center 1 and data center 2, I have some pretty good connectivity. I have some 10, 25, 40, or 100 gig connectivity between these two locations in the same city, and that's kind of what I'm used to. These are kind of just a spanned network, and I treat it as one, and this is kind of the feeling that I want to get to the cloud. Well, those options of highly connected networking to your cloud resources are totally available for you. You just need to investigate it. If that's not viable for you, consider something like you can consider just a direct connect to the cloud, or you consider services like Azure Virtual WAN. And with the next one here I've got for you, John, you're going to finish this up, then we're going to take some Q&A, is a little bit of a different spin on training for the users. So there's some different options that we have for training, and one of the things that I find is so great is like FEMA and Red Cross have some really great training plans that are out there, and we don't always think of this for training our IT teams. What are your thoughts on this one, just out of the box thinking for training our IT teams beyond just techie stuff?
Well, absolutely, because a lot of times the disaster isn't all about the tech. We tend to think of it that way, right? We're focused on restoring the tech and restoring the technical capability of our organizations, but we often have to do that in the context of a much greater disaster. I mean, let's look at the organizations that are in New Orleans right now, Louisiana, other areas affected by, Hurricane Ida that just came through within the last month. So those organizations are trying to restore and recover operations from a technical standpoint that is very, very context aware. They had areas that didn't have power for weeks, right? So did their DR strategy contain things like generator power, that sort of thing, right? And if they did, and they have generator, how is that generator fueled? Is it a limited propane tank? So now you have to be able to, if you're going to run for an extended period of time, get propane refills and those kind of things. So there's a lot that goes in that isn't just in the technical concept. And when you take training from these, like the sites we've listed here, right? So FEMA, Red Cross, those kind of things, they're going to hopefully spur you into thinking a lot about those outside the tech area aspects so you can build them into your plan. It's like you mentioned with business continuity. Business continuity plans aren't a DR strategy, but they are part of the process, right? And a good holistic vision for DR is certainly going to include, how do you keep servicing customers? How do you keep the business from, just bleeding cash in the event of a disaster, whatever it may be? In addition, how do you keep quite literally here instead of figuratively, how do you keep the lights on? Because that could be a big deal. So these are great parts of it. Another thing that I want to throw out when it comes to training is, remember, your backup is only as good as your restorability. So if you're not doing test restores and you're not doing them on every type of workload that you back up, then you don't have backups, okay? I don't consider them, we don't consider them valid backups until they've been verified. So just saying you review the logs, just saying that, the software you use, whatever it may be, tells you that it was successful, that isn't enough. You need to be scheduling test restores, test disaster recovery implementation, tests of your business continuity plan, all that kind of thing. And if that means you come in on a weekend and simulate a power outage by having maintenance cut the power to the building and see how things go, then that's what that means. The more effective your testing is, the better prepared you are, the less impact to your organization when disaster strikes, right? Preparedness is the key to response.
Awesome, John. Awesome. So we actually have a wave of questions that have come in here, and there's a couple that I want to particularly address here. Joseph asked a great question, which is, do you feel Microsoft will eventually build ransomware protection into the OS? And I can take this if you're all right with this, John. And the short
absolutely. I know your answer already.
Short answer is, Joseph, it's already there, but you have to be on the next-gen operating systems. If you still have Server 2008, if you still have Server 2012, sorry, not much help for you. Starting with Server 2016 and into 2019 and 2022, those core operating system products have built-in ransomware protection. You just need to check it out. It is there, but if you want to get the extended value of that, you need to have an add-on SKU to that, which is called now Azure Defender, formerly Defender Advanced Threat Protection, now called Azure Defender. It can extend to your on-prem infrastructure via an Azure Arc connection, and you can get the Advanced Threat Protection agent from Microsoft's cloud. All right, the next one here, John, is from Paul, another great question here. He says, in Azure, I have multiple protections like Security Center, firewalls, backups for my DBs and VMs, but not Azure Site Recovery. What is the cost and or benefit of adding this? So either you can take this or I can take this. It's all good. So, John.
I want you to take this one because I know you have some great thoughts on this, Dave, so you go right ahead.
I may have written a book on protecting your infrastructure using Azure Site Recovery. So that you please don't ever quote me on costs, folks, but it's roughly, I think, about $30 server per month is the cost for Azure Site Recovery. And what's the benefit to this, especially if your VMs are already in Azure? multi-region survivability. So if your region happens to go down, and let's say I like to pick West Coast, East Coast, United States. Let's say there's a big event, power grid failure on the East Coast, and we are using Azure Site Recovery to replicate over to a West Coast data center. We can actually press that big red button. So do I think that there's value for this even in the cloud? Absolutely, 100%. I think we've probably got time for one more question, John, and this one here is going to be for you. And this one here is from Scott. Great question from Scott. And it's going to be, we get a lot of vendors offering an Office 365 backup. We are under the impression that Microsoft 365 is inherently backed up, and a second layer of protection is not necessarily required. Can you speak to your experience using kind of third-party solutions to extend the protection that Microsoft natively gives you? Because I think Microsoft will give you something like 30 days by default, but not much beyond that, right?
Yeah, and Dave, let's handle this one together because, one of my favorite third-party utilities for Office 365 backup and recovery is Veeam, and we have one of the a very long tenured Veeam vanguard in yourself here. So I know that you are well versed in specifically the protections that they offer for Office 365 and why they augment beyond what's built in. The fact of the matter is that there are protections built in, right? Just like there are for any service or infrastructure or anything else that you run up in the cloud on Azure. There's a certain amount of threat protection built in. There's a certain amount of resiliency built in. All those things kind of, I talked about one scenario earlier with the built-in with OneDrive for Business, and you mentioned on that. But remember I told you that your ability to protect is tied to your ability to imagine disaster scenarios. Well, unfortunately, those built-in protections, they take a fairly small subset of the things you can imagine protecting against and protect against them. So yeah, a lot of those most common scenarios, there's some built-in protections available to you or at low cost to you with your M365 or O365 licensing. But when it comes to DR, we need to do more than manage by that 80-20 rule, right? Hey, I'll design all my stuff around 80% of the events, and the remaining 20 I'll just handle when they happen. When it comes to DR, that 20% is way too big of a risk for most organizations to take. So you've got to get much closer to designing your strategy to manage to 99% and just trying to deal with the 1% exception. So Dave, I'll toss it back to you.
Perfect, thanks. And with that, I think we're probably going to be out of time. So I'll hand it back to John Waters for some closing thoughts. And
hey, thanks, guys.
Perfect.
Thank you both for a great session. Yeah, we are out of time. Too bad, man. I think the questions could keep coming, but we're going to take a short break now. But Dave and John will be back at the top of the hour for our second session. What you're probably doing wrong and right when it comes to cloud backup and recovery. That session will be moderated by my colleague David Rammel, who leads the editorial team at Virtualization and Cloud Review. Many thanks to Dave and John for a great first session, and to our sponsors, Clumio, Metallic, and Faction, for making it possible. Now would be a great time to check out those extra resources on your console provided by our sponsors. I'll be back. Dave will be back to, pardon me, I apologize. Dave will be back to moderate the third session, at which we will be giving away a 13-inch MacBook Pro with the Apple M1 processor and 2 terabytes of storage to one lucky attendee. But you've got to be here at the end to win, so stay tuned. Back in a few.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here, and thank you to John K. Waters for moderating that first session, and of course Clumio, Metallic, and Faction for underwriting the summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our summit called what you're probably doing wrong and right when it comes to cloud backup and recovery. Welcome back our speakers for this session, Dave Kamula and John O'Neill. Okay, Dave and John, you've already been introduced. The audience has seen your bios, and we're all looking forward to what you have to say, so please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much, David. And I have to give you a personal shout-out for the amazing blog post you had off one of our sessions that we did a few weeks ago. I think it turned out great. So thank you very much, and thank you to our sponsors of the event, and thanks to everyone that's sticking with us, because we're doing a back-to-back. There was so much content, we couldn't fit it all into one session, so we're able to break it up into two. And so now we get a chance to really dig in a little bit about some of the different technologies and techniques for backing up to the cloud. And we're not really going to pull any punches here, are we, John? We're going to take and keep it as real as possible with everyone, because that's how we're going to learn, and that's how we're going to get better, especially when it comes to backup and recovery with the cloud.
You know it. You know that both of us, we believe that, those of us that when we acquire knowledge, when we acquire experience, part of our responsibility is to share that with others so that they can benefit and learn and see those scenarios firsthand. So we tell it like it is.
Awesome. Well, let's get this show on the road. I know that we've got a lot of content, and for this one here, I hope we'll have to manage our time, John, because there's so many good questions at the end of the last one here. I hope we can get to a bunch as well with this one. So when we take a look at the recovery scenarios, we mentioned this in the previous session, there's kind of two different DR plans that we have. There's DR Plan 1, which is traditional DR, and then there's the second one, which deals with, the bad guys that are out there. So this particular topic, we'll talk about traditional DR, because this is very relevant. And I have a story that goes back probably about 7-8 years ago that Microsoft covered. Was I got called into a local school board in northern Canada, John, and there was forest fires surrounding the city that they were in, and they were under evacuation orders. And as it turned out, they did not have any off-site backups of any of their infrastructure. So none of the school rolls, the grades, none of that stuff was actually backed up. And this was right around the time where Microsoft was coming out with this new product called Azure Site Recovery. And so what we were able to do was to replicate as much of that infrastructure as we could before the power went out, because something that we really have to think about is that in the event of some type of a disaster, sometimes you actually have time to plan for these things. So, for example, before a hurricane hits, we've got typically some lead time that comes in before that hurricane's going to hit. So we may have some time to replicate. Now, I'm not saying if you don't have a DR plan, wait until you're going to have a major event to start replicating somewhere else. That's probably a bad idea. You want to start this immediately if you're not doing it. But kind of what are some of your thoughts around the ability to plan around some of these scenarios? We talk a lot about the cyber scenarios, but what if we can actually plan for these scenarios? What does that look like, John?
Well, and so, one of the first recommendations that I have based on our experience for this is when it comes to planning for the best possible recovery scenario, because that's really what DR strategies are all about, right, is preparing for the best possible recovery. And that best possible recovery is usually, in terms of the organization, it's usually the loss or reduction in IT services for the least amount of time and exposing the company to the least amount of risk or cost. So, what that means in layman's terms is, hey, when disaster strikes, we need to get the IT resources up and running as quickly as possible for as low as expense as possible. And that all goes back to our preparation, our vision, our strategy, all the things we put in place, our practice, and all that depends upon strong integration with the rest of your organization's teams. So, when it comes to these conventional DR scenarios, we need in IT to be coordinating and practicing our recoveries with the maintenance team, the facilities team, right, with the HR organization, because those are the organizations that are going to, and looking at those two, there's obviously all the others, finance, all those, but HR is typically going to be the organization that is managing communication with your fellow employees, with your user base, with all that kind of thing, and letting them know what's going on and when they can come to the office and when they can't come to the office, and that sort of thing. And so if you've got a strong relationship and preparation with them, they can also communicate as part of that with your users, with your teammates, with your employees. They can communicate things like, okay, it's not safe to come to the office. Please, log into your portal and you'll find instructions there for how to work remote or that sort of thing. And they can be a communication arm, an extension of you. And likewise with maintenance. In the last session, we talked a lot or a bit about the fact that, if you're going to weather a storm, pun intended, I guess, you need to make sure that your infrastructure is capable of supporting that, and not just your IT infrastructure, but your power infrastructure and that sort of thing. And the example that I use there is the generators. A lot of people have site generators that will run their IT systems, no problem. But in the case of many organizations that are not in an area where there's natural gas or that kind of feed, those generators are running from diesel tanks or propane tanks. And, usually organizations don't have a week's worth of fuel or a month's worth of fuel or whatever. But we know from Hurricane Ida that recently came through that power can be out in areas for weeks at a time, and looking outside the U.S., looking to areas like Haiti or Puerto Rico that have been victims over the last few years of horrible natural disasters. They had areas that were without infrastructure for months and longer, unfortunately. And in those cases, is it possible to run from your generator? Do you have relationships with fuel providers to where you can run? Or do you need to have a strategy that says, hey, if the local power grid isn't restored within, 14 days, I need to look at running out of a remote data center, that sort of thing. So you need to be coordinating with your other non-technical teams when it comes to preparing for conventional DRs scenarios like are on this slide. And you need to be thinking out of the box when it comes to your strategies to survive these events.
Yeah, absolutely. And my example with regards to the lack of diesel fuel was we had a scenario, John, where we had a fire in a downtown corridor in Calgary, and the fire department had cordoned off I think 3 square city blocks where nobody could get in and out. And I had one of our customers that was down there. They did have a diesel generator that was part of the tower, and they couldn't even get fuel to it. So this was a very, very big issue. So you've only got a sustained amount of time that you have. So you've got to be able to not only have your plan, but be able to execute and make those decisions quickly before that power actually goes out. Because once that power goes out, you move from what's called a planned failover to an unplanned failover or failover now. So, all right, the next recovery scenario number 2. And these are the things that I find that organizations are not doing very well in regards to backup and recovery to the cloud, is planning for this type of event. And this type of event will typically go and target your backup repositories you have. You may think that you've got the best backup vendor out there, and there's no way. We've tested restores, we've done all this stuff. Well, I'm going to give you an example of the Kaseya recovery event that John and I were recently a part of. The cyber insurance vendor actually provided us with the INI file that was used for the Revel ransomware strain. And inside of there, it specifically targeted active backup vendors and their files. And so if, for example, the word backup was inside of anywhere in the file system, it was an instant shift delete to delete any of that data. So here's a little tip for you. If you are going to be storing very critical data on your system, don't put it in a folder with the word backup. And I know that that can change to anything, but that's the kind of thought process you have to have. That ransomware that's going to attack your system, that malware that's going to attack your system, it's an application. It has code. It has instruction sets. It has a job to do. And the more that we can understand that, the more that we can protect against it. And so inside of this recovery scenario, John and I have had to deal with many cyber insurance vendors throughout the course of the recoveries that we've been involved in. And throughout that process, one of the very first things that they're going to ask you to do is put advanced persistent threat protection onto your system so that we can find the command and control servers that are in there, shut them down, isolate them at a network level, and protect your infrastructure. No recoveries will take place until you can actually figure out what is going on, where root cause came from, because it is absolutely pointless to recover an environment while you still have an active hack taking place. All right, we talked a little bit about this one in the last session, John, so I don't think we'll spend too much time on this. This is one of those areas that I feel that we can do a lot better from cloud backup and recovery, is having an understanding of the traffic and what it takes to get to and from. We actually had a very, very good comment from Edgar in the previous session. We didn't have a chance to get to his question, but he was actually thanking us for reminding him to contact his ISPs that speeds can be increased, and they could be increased at next to no cost. Most ISPs run with what they like to have as 60-month or 5-year contracts. And what I find is that as you're getting closer to that contract renewal date, they want nothing more than to sink their teeth into your organization and have you sign another 60-month contract. Well, this is where your negotiating skills come in. And maybe, John, can you speak to this one point about speeds being able to be increased and potentially at no or little cost additions to the organization?
Absolutely. Thanks, Dave. We talked about this in the last session, that one of the things that I'm seeing more and more is that a number of customers, clients, organizations have configured their connections into the cloud. So speaking specifically of Azure and using that example, they've set up site-to-site VPNs using the old Azure basic VPN SKU, and it was limited to 100 megabits. And Microsoft has transitioned, and they have the more modern SKUs, and the SKU 1 level, the current SKU 1, is 650 megabits of bandwidth, so 6.5 times as fast as the old basic SKU, and it's relatively the same cost. So simply by going through the work of logging into your tenant and upgrading the SKU, you can increase your speed by 6.5 times. Okay, that's not a small amount. That's a huge amount. And then once you've done that work, it becomes a lot easier to upgrade and move between the other VPN SKUs. So say you have an event and you have to egress a lot of data out of there to recover from, you can jump up to that SKU 2 and go all the way up to 1,000 megabits per second and be in that much shape. And I want to give that consideration, right? Because if you leave it alone and you've had your VPN set up for a year and a half and it's on that basic SKU, your egress is limited to 100 megs. If you go through the work now of getting it converted to the new SKU methodology and that sort of thing, you not only increase your current speed to 6.5, but you increase your ability to take advantage later on of that 1,000 meg. So you're going to get a 10 times performance boost on your egress when it is most critical, when you're trying to recover from that end-of-day scenario and get your systems back online. Remember what I mentioned in a couple slides ago, that DR is all about our ability to recover from an event as quickly as possible. And this slide right here is a huge factor when it comes to your ability to recover quickly. Dave, back to you.
Oh, well, apparently I was muted. So now I'm not muted anymore. We had a question coming in from Gopal. We'll handle this one live right now. Is what's the difference between ingress and egress traffic? Great question. Ingress is networking speak for inbound traffic, and egress is networking speak for outbound traffic. Great question. Thank you very much.
And remember, it's inbound to the cloud and outbound from the cloud, okay?
Yeah, exactly. All right, John. So this one here is panic mode has now set in. Let's walk through our one Monday morning scenario. We now have some type of an incident. We often speak about the cyber incidents. Let's take a step back. Let's go to DR number 1, which is a traditional incident. We know that we are going to be having some type of a power loss from a natural event that's happening, and systems are starting to go offline. Now a week has gone by, and we're still there. We'll say not a week. That's not a very good RTO for an organization. We'll say a little bit of time has gone by. The business is breathing down the necks of IT, saying, "Listen, we really need to get our systems back in order." And this is another one of those areas that I feel that we just do not do a very good job of communicating with the business as to what realistic expectations of a recovery time objective actually are. Because if you talk to the business, they're going to say, well, no lost time is optimal. Don't ever go down. I want you to have 100% uptime. And this is where we go back as IT saying, okay, that's not really possible. We typically do this in windows like 2 hours, 4 hours, 8 hours, 1 day, 1 week. How long can the system potentially be down? Because not all systems are as critical inside of an organization. And one of the ones that I find that during an emergency we get hit up for right away is all dependent on the time of month that a disaster or emergency occurred. If you are towards the middle of the month, or you are towards the end of the month, typically we will be getting some very frantic calls from our accounting department because they potentially have payroll uploads that need to go so that our staff can get paid. This is a very important process. And one of the things that I've seen organizations do is they're actually starting to decouple the upload requirements for payroll, because especially in organizations that have been bitten by extended outages caused by ransomware, John, they have that CSV file that lists all the current employees, and they have the ability to upload. Even if there were changes to payroll, at least they can run it the same as the last time, so individuals can have their paychecks, pay their car payments, pay their mortgages, feed their kids while we're dealing with these scenarios. So when we're looking at the RTO, in the event of an emergency, it's kind of like we have to set this with the business to set expectations, but then we really have to hustle to get particular systems up and running. So I guess my question for you on this one is that, in your experience, what are the system or systems that you see most actively requested to come online first in the event of an emergency?
So obviously I spend a lot of my time, and I've spent a lot of my career in the manufacturing distribution space. So for-profit companies and for-profit companies that have physical operations, right? They're producing something, or they're moving it around a warehouse, loading trucks, unloading trucks, that kind of thing. So the first systems are anything critical to keeping parts being produced or stuff moving. One of the founders of a company I work for many years ago, it's a manufacturing company, said that if the presses aren't going up and down, we're not making money. And you can't say it more succinctly and accurately than that. So if you have systems that are necessary to support your organization's ability to produce its product, okay, and that product doesn't have to be physical, it could be digital, whatever, but the product that your company produces or service that it offers, those are the first systems that have to be brought up, and they're the ones that can withstand the least amount of outage time, because every minute they're out is costing the company dollars or costing the organization dollars. So Now, in addition to whatever costs you're incurring related to paying a ransomware person or rebuilding the facility or whatever, you're also not making any revenue. And so that's, a huge downside. And in addition to not making any revenue, you're potentially disrupting your customer base, and that could produce downstream negative results such as lost contracts, breach of contract, penalties, all these types of things. And at the very least, it's going to cause you to take a credibility hit with your customers. So get those production impacting systems online. And again, I mentioned the distribution scenario at the beginning. That means that if you need systems to support your ability to move and ship product, those are the systems that I'm talking about here. And if you want to see the importance of moving and shipping product, just look at the supply chain problems the world is experiencing right now. Everything from our inability to unload boats at ports to a lack of truck drivers to move it around on our nation's highways to, a lack of containers to pack the stuff in. We're in a real problem here. So compounding that would be a loss of supporting systems. So have those up and ready. The next ones that come are typically the financial systems because, yes, you don't want to disrupt your customer, but in order to keep your revenue coming in, you have to be able to transact, send invoices, receive payments, make deposits, that kind of thing. So those systems need to be up. And I could keep going and going, but I know we want to kind of talk less and answer more at the end of this session. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Dave.
Perfect, and such great real-life examples there, John. And two more that really come to mind for me is, look at the fuel shortage right now in England. The pumps are dry. Can't even get drivers to go get them. So how are you going to feed your Jenny's diesel fuel? And number two, the rolling blackouts that are hitting in China right now, impacting even Apple's facilities and things like that. So these supply chain constraints are just going to get worse for us. And I want to give everyone a very clear heads up right now with these supply chain constraints that are in place right now. If your emergency is going to require you to procure hardware, please be expecting significant delays. We are seeing upwards of 9 weeks right now just to get servers delivered. Networking components, chips, composites, things like that are in high demand, and they're not just going to magically show up at your data center. If you do not have hot spare drives, things like that in your data center, get those ordered because you're not just going to necessarily be able to put in a warranty claim and say, okay, yep, I need a spare drive. Please ship that on my 24 hours notice. Those may not actually be available to you. Please think about that because that's very important.
Real quick, I just want to throw in there a couple of real-world examples that you know of. We've worked together on this. So I ordered a replacement switch from, the biggest switch vendor out there, and we ordered that replacement switch, and it took 3 months to get that switch, and it is their most common current model. So keep that in mind. And then the other thing is we ordered some HCI gear, and the potential for the 45 gig NICs that we had in there was, a 6-month or greater delay. So we switched those to 100 gig NICs and still have, a 6-week estimated delay. So like you said, we need to be incorporating these things into our DR strategy because if we don't, we could have the best laid plans and be waylaid by something we didn't imagine. I mentioned it before. Our ability to protect is only as good as our imagination.
Well, and then your thoughts of migrating to the cloud become all that much more real. Even if you didn't expect that you were going to be going to the cloud, you might be going to the cloud real fast if you can't procure your own gear. All right. So the next one that we're going to look at here is just right up along that alley. What a great segue into this. Are you going to stay in the cloud? You may have to, because if that natural disaster wipes out your physical infrastructure, you could be looking at having to persist in the cloud for some point in time. It could take upwards of 6 months even to, rebuild or get space in a co-location facility, and what do you really want to do with that? So I'm going to highly suggest to everyone that you analyze those workloads that you have right now because the secondary home that you have, if it is a secondary location and you're in control of that, great. If your secondary location is the cloud and that's part of your plan, you might have to stay there for an extended period of time. So a couple things that I want to point out to you. If you're going to be staying in the cloud for an extended point in time, one of the things you really need to consider is your core networking capabilities that you have in the cloud. The cloud vendors are going to give you stock firewall SKUs that are available to you, but here's your little gold nugget. A lot of your firewall vendors will allow you to inline place their models into your tenant, so that, let's say, for example, you're with firewall vendor X. I'm not going to mention any vendors, just common firewall vendors that are out there. You may have the opportunity to put the exact similar type firewall up into your cloud tenant. So now your management capabilities are nearly in line the same. Some of these vendors have done a great job publishing architecture surrounding this, and that's something that I would highly advise, because you're going from a next generation firewall that you've got on-prem to potentially a level 1 stock entry-level SKU, and you need to make sure you plan for that as well as you're going to go move your data up there. And we just talked about some of the extended outages and things like that, and are you going to potentially have to stay in the cloud? So make sure that you're adding that to your to-do list, that, what if the possibility is that we're not going to be able to come home for a foreseeable future here? Getting all of your network paths rerouted, maybe, some Azure virtual desktops are going to be important for you, some VDI in the cloud. These are all things you have to think about now, especially in the world that we live in here today. All right, the next one here. This one here falls in so nicely to all of the things that we preach, John, when we talk to our IT teams about this. And my point to this is that, have you actually really tested your failover, or did you just test one VM and it successfully went across? What is the difference between this kind of soft and hard recovery effort? Because I can guarantee you one thing, John, that the business does not understand the difference between kind of a hard cutover or a soft recovery up to the cloud. Those missing pieces, like, oh, well, we were missing some routes on that server and it can't communicate with a few of the other SQL servers that were at a different location. Some of those pieces of, the underlying infrastructure and what this looks like are so important. So I'm a Microsoft guy through and through, John. So one of the big pieces for me is understanding the application stack, and how well do we really understand the application stack for what it is that we support and provide. And Microsoft has a pretty cool thing that you can take and that you can load up inside of your virtual infrastructure, and it's called Azure Service Map. And what Azure Service Map will do is it'll actually map out your applications end to end, showing all ports and connections, and kind of give you a beautiful little map of what that application looks like. And if you're ever part of a team that's had to try to do this manually, oh my goodness, you better be prepared for some painstaking work. So if it's not Azure Service Map, it's going to be something like that you're going to want to look at. You need to map out your application stack, because there is zero possibility of you having a good, successful failover to any of your data centers, regardless if it's the cloud, unless you really understand your application stack. And so, I'll get off my soapbox now and hand this back to you, John, because this is where I see us doing a horrible job from IT's perspective. And this is one of the things I see us doing really wrong, is just not having a good understanding of what it is that we're protecting. So what are your thoughts, John?
Well, I can tell you that this may sound really strange, but in events where I've been consulted by boards of directors or the C-suite, one of the things that I tell them as far as really understanding the impact of the business of an outage is to see how the IT team reacts and how they revert and how they implement and do all that in a live outage. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like a pen test, but for your DR strategy. You go in without warning the IT team, without anything, and you cut the power of the data center. you shut things down. And yeah, there's going to be an outage to the business, and they're going to take the cost of that. But you find out really quick whether or not they were doing thorough tests. You find out really quick whether or not there were parts of the application stack they didn't take into account. So, I call it the highest level DR pen test that you can have. And the equivalent scenario is lots of times IT leads red team, blue team, cloud team testing for security, but there are other pen tests where only the CISO or only even the board of directors knows that these things are going to take place, because they need to get an evaluation that is outside the context of the team being able to know about the event and prepare for it as an event. When DR strikes, it isn't something that you can, I'm going to get ready for the next 2 days because I know in 2 days, a flood's going to happen, that kind of thing. So that's one of the things I suggest on this.
Awesome. And we actually had a question come in from the audience, and it was actually so relevant to some of these discussions about failing over to other locations. Robin, thank you so much for your question. The question was surrounding when we have to fail over to DR and we're dealing with DNS. DNS can really be the bane of our existence because we might have to re-IP those servers at the other location. What are some of the things that we can do to mitigate that? So number one, Robin, great question. Totally in line with everything we're talking about here. Typically, we can drop the time to live values down on those. But the second thing that we can do is potentially converge our DNS infrastructure and force a replication after those changes have been made to push them out to the client. So the TTL on the records will help from the client caching perspective, especially if we drop that down to, let's say, like 30 seconds or a minute or something like that, depending on what your DNS servers will provide. But don't forget to also replicate if you're using, for example, Active Directory integrated DNS, make sure we're actually replicating that around, because you may have many different sites and everything may work at the corporate office, but the outlying sites might not work because you're going to take time to convert. So don't forget to replicate that as well. Great question, Rob. Thank you. And if you have questions, make sure you fire away. I'm checking the Q&A as we're going here. All right. Business continuity plans. We kind of skimmed over this a little bit in the previous session, John, but I do believe that there is a natural marriage between business continuity plans as well as your kind of DR plans. Because for me, DR plans are more the plans that get executed from IT's perspective. It's kind of the to-do list, the checklist, the call-down list. Hey, if something happens, this is how we recover the SQL server. This is how we recover the app server. This is how we potentially fail over to the cloud. But the definition statements that really go into saying, I need to be protected in 4-hour intervals. This particular business unit runs 24 hours a day and must not be impacted. All of those critical things will go inside of that business continuity plan, including all of those intangibles that we mentioned in the previous session, like, for example, phone systems, your voice over IP system that you've got that's legacy and on-prem. How are we going to fail that over an extended outage? Are we just going to let the phones go dead when people try to call into the office? How are we going to redirect that? What's the process for that? So what are your thoughts around the kind of marriage of the BCP, business continuity plans for this, and DR? Because I once again find this is a big area that we fall down in from IT's perspective, John.
Well, thanks for throwing this over to me, because I definitely have some thoughts on this, because I spend a lot of time in this. And the way that I cut to the chase on this and describe it to the executive teams, the C-suite, and the managers and leaders is the DR plan is what IT implements to bring those IT systems back online and up to 100% efficiency after a disaster. The business continuity plan is what the business does to continue operations while the IT team is executing the DR plan. Okay, so they actually happen at the same time concurrently, but they're being executed by two different areas and for two different purposes. again, so let's take the IT system out of it and use that example of shipping parts. If you can't ship a part to your customer because you can't print a packing list, well, your customer isn't going to get their part, and they're not going to be able to produce what they produce from it, and it's going to have a downstream effect. Maybe your business continuity plan outlines a strategy for manually completing, handwriting, if you will, a packing list so that products can continue to move. Maybe your business continuity plan is around the HR function and making sure that, employees are being able to get in and out of facilities because your access control system is offline and it's tied to your IT systems. Maybe your business continuity plan is related to finance and payroll and making sure that your people get paid, because guess what? A lot of people around the world, not just in any specific country, are living paycheck to paycheck. So the fact that your company was hit by ransomware and is down for 2 weeks is no consolation to them when they can't pay their bills. And maybe they have auto payments scheduled, and now those auto payments hit, but your direct deposit didn't, and now they've got a bunch of fees that they have to pay. Well, the company better take a couple considerations they outline in that BCP, one of which is how do we prevent that happening? How do we make sure that our people get paid when they're supposed to get paid? The second is, what are we going to do? How are we going to absorb those costs that we cause our employees to incur, such as, return check fees and that kind of thing for auto payments? So just a couple scenarios to think of, but just remember that while you're focusing on that disaster recovery and restoring your backup and getting those systems up and running, the business needs to be executing that continuity plan that allows it to continue to operate as close to normal operations as possible. Now, when a BCP is in effect, I have never actually seen it to where they can operate as efficiently or as effectively as if all the systems were running, because otherwise you wouldn't need those systems. But the more outlined it is, the more detailed it is, the more practiced it is, the less impact your company, its customers, its employees will have.
Yeah, at one point I've been doing business continuity for the better part of 20 years, John, and for your organization, if you are worried about a site location, for example, if you're dealing with laboratory services or something like that, and you are shut down for some type of hazmat scenario for whatever reason, and you need to get people back to work, it's two choices: either work from home or also consider renting what's called a business resumption center. It is a temporary office space that you can work with that vendor, and they can have pre-configured network path set up, system set up, cubicles set up, everything ready to go, and you just kind of rent it on demand. So I know I don't have it in the slides, but that's also part of that business continuity plan. It's potentially a business resumption location or facility for key business unit leaders and staff. All right, next one here. Cyber insurance policies, John. Boy, oh boy, near and dear to our heart, right? These things are changing faster than we can read them. And you need to make sure that you review your cyber policies. Kaseya was one of the biggest ransomware incidents in modern history, impacting thousands, if not tens of thousands of organizations. I think the numbers that are reported are greatly diminished to what is actually out there. The service provider that I worked with personally had 80 of 80 customers hit, not computers, not systems, customers, because that Kaseya agent had system-level access. It was really the worst-case scenario for any of us trying to defend against it. And so you need to make sure that you review those policies, because every year that goes by, we seem to learn a little bit more about the importance of cybersecurity. I've personally seen cyber policies now demanding multi-factor authentication. I've seen cyber insurance policies having a requirement for reporting in the event of potential breach or potential situations. And if things change and you're not passing an audit requirement and you don't report, you may not actually be covered. You want to check the fine print. The good news is most cyber insurance policy vendors that I've worked with have actually paid out in the event that it needs to happen. There is a whole process for this. I'm not going to lie, it's not really pretty. Kaseya was really awful because the cyber insurance vendors are so hammered with claims that it's taking a long time for them to react. But typically they'll have their own SecOps teams, security operations teams, and cyber threat analysis experts that'll come in and help your organization. And so, John, have you seen, particularly in some of the policies that you've reviewed, just kind of on one or 2 points here, the requirement for having a cyber audit and multi-factor? Have you seen those?
Absolutely, and they continue to grow, right? And so a few things here about cyber insurance. I'll be pretty quick. One, if you're not familiar with the NIST 800 series policies, get familiar, because a lot of cyber insurance carriers are doing reviews that are thoroughly based on those standards and recommendations. So get familiar with them, not just the 800-53, but the newer 100 and 200 series documents. The second thing is just a little background and understanding. Cybersecurity insurance is all based on carriers' ability to spread risk. Okay, it's kind of like hurricane insurance, that sort of thing. No individual insurance company can absorb the risk of a large-scale event like that. They can't take something that is spread over so many organizations, so many companies. They just couldn't pay all those claims, so they spread that risk. And for them to do that and get those underwriters and other companies that buy in and things like that, of course, they have to mitigate their risk. And they do that by asking more and more pointed questions and making you evaluate. And I cannot recommend to you enough, don't just give lip service to your answers, because as Dave, you mentioned, when an event occurs and you have to have that conversation and you're thinking, okay, well, our cyber insurance carrier is going to come in, they're going to help us offset some of these costs. They are going to look at every answer you gave them with a fine-tooth comb. And if anything was inaccurate, you're going to get denied. End of story. So if you tell them that, yeah, we have multi-factor authentication in place, and they come in and they find out that really you only have multi-factor authentication for your IT group, you haven't implemented it across the rest of your organization, well, that's a basis for them to deny you. If you tell them that, you haven't implemented things like Android devices on your network, and they come in and they find, and I used the example in the previous session, which is why I bring it up, they find out that you have some time clocks, or what's very common right now are those COVID scanners that do temperature scans when you walk in and out, and a lot of them are Android-based, and you plug them into your network. Well, now that goes against an attestation you made, and it is basis for denial. Even though your current incident could have nothing to do with those things, understand they have the right to look at all of them and make a decision on paying out a claim for them. The other thing that I'm going to throw up about insurance is be very particular as you look at these. The carriers, again, to mitigate risk, are increasing the deductibles way up there. So if you think that they're going to absorb the cost of paying that ransom, or you being down for 6 weeks, or anything else in its entirety, you're probably going to be disappointed. In fact, most of them, you're absorbing the first $1 million worth of risk sometimes just to have that. So, pay attention to this stuff.
Yeah, and 2 points along this point to move on, John. Number one is the 2 payouts that I've seen have been prepayments by the customer. So, for example, the last one that we had where there was the Kaseya attack and they had to pay out $55,000 per server, that was prepaid by the organization. So I really hope that you've got a slush fund that's kicking around, because I don't know very many banks that are going to lend you money to go pay out threat actors. So that's number one. And number two, it's on kind of a reimbursement basis. And all right. So now let's talk about some ways that we can protect against all of this here, John. So protecting your assets with backup and VR is just as important. And so how do we protect against ransomware and the bad guys that are out there? So number one statement that I'll give you here is that I did a session with a really good friend of mine, the godfather of group policy, Jeremy Moskowitz, and he did a session on notes from the field, how a threat actor took home $4 million with ransomware, and he was actually giving tips as to how not to get ransomed. And one of the biggest ones that stood out from me was him saying that traditional antivirus alone is not enough. And this goes for both your DR environments, your backup environments, for your production environments. Traditional AV is not enough. And it's so important, John, I'm going to repeat that. Traditional AV alone is not enough. You need to make sure that you're investing in some type of advanced persistent threat protection. For Microsoft on the desktop, it's called Defender Advanced Threat Protection, or MDATP. And now for servers, Microsoft has a new SKU available called Azure Defender. And what that does is that integrates all of the advanced threat protection agents that you'd see in Windows 10 into your server OS, and it would bring it into Microsoft's next-gen security AI-based cloud and help protect all of those really important assets that you have. The next piece of this is, and this is really funny for me, John, the concept of a fabric. Because, for years, we came from a space of Windows NT deployments with domains everywhere to, from an administration perspective, we need to consolidate to a single domain. That's the utopia that we want, and it's so much easier to manage. Well, one of the cruxes of that is it's also so much easier to attack, because now I've got a single threat surface for my attackers to come inbound through. So highly consider moving all of your core backup and DR resources out to a dedicated fabric. We even go as far as to moving our hypervisors out there, putting it on a separate VLAN, securing it, and making sure that there's very limited access to that ultra-secure configuration. Having a zero-trust configuration is also incredibly important for us, because zero trust is a concept that Microsoft is buying into big time for everything inside of their stack. And simply put, zero trust can be summed up in a couple sentences. Number one, a domain administrator is like the God account, is like the God user inside of Active Directory. It has access to everything by default. So here's your rule. A domain administrator only needs to log into domain controllers and nothing else. A server admin needs to log into servers. A desktop admin needs to log into desktops. Desktop admins do not need to log into servers or domain controllers. Server admins do not need to log into desktops or domain controllers. And so you're building a segmented model inside of here. And as you move through that, we highly advise that you secure with multi-factor authentication. Enable stuff like PowerShell, just enough administration, it's actually just enough administration, not just enough access. The autocomplete got me there, so just enough administration. John and I have actually written a book on this. And then two new ones that are going to be really important for your cloud, which is just-in-time access, which is giving access to systems only as people need them and individuals need them, and also privileged identity access inside of the cloud. So and on-prem, so that we can give you the rights that are required only at the time that are necessary, and then we're going to strip them away when they're not there. That way we don't have this dormant administrator scenario sitting out there where we're going to run ourselves into big trouble with, having high privileged accounts hanging out there for us. So with that, John, I think we'll probably have time for one more slide here. Yeah.
Okay. As you pick that slide, all I'm going to do is remind people that they should be repeating to themselves, least privilege and zero trust are our mantra. End of story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're probably going to end the session here, John. And one of the big pieces of this is that this really is a great kind of segue. We'll take some Q&A. We'll hand this back to David Rameau in a second here. But, these pieces, it seems like just like a whole slew of, acronyms that are out there. But you know what? These are so important from a backup and recovery and in the cloud. And I guess I'll leave on one point here, is that you're going to fail over to the cloud. Something has happened. And when you failed over to the cloud, you assume, oh, well, my cloud is in Microsoft or Amazon or Google, and I can build infrastructure in there and I can replicate there. It does not mean that it is secure out of box. Same rules that play for on-prem infrastructure also play for the cloud. You need to take the same diligence into securing your cloud tenants and your cloud running resources and workloads as you do your on-prem infrastructure. And if you don't, you're going to be leaving gaping holes. I like to equate this to, installing an application by just going next, finish. Well, will it work? Probably. Are there any highly available customizations or security considerations taken into? No, not really. Same plays true for your cloud tenant. Don't be Mr. or Mrs. Next finish in the cloud, because that will come back to bite you. And with that, I'm going to hand this back over to our wonderful esteemed colleague, Mr. David Rammel. And David, do we have any any questions that have come in here for us?
We certainly do. And let's just get right to it, shall we? We have a few minutes to answer these questions, so let's try and squeeze them in. First one comes from Edgar. Where does SSO land on this scale? Is it secure when matched with MFA?
Dave, let me jump in and take this one because, I've been in this space for a long time. In fact, I was speaking on biometrics and biometric security and multi-factor back in the 90s to the government agencies and military when it wasn't popular in the commercial space like it is now. And so this one I've got some history with. And as particularly when it comes to SSO, single sign-on. So here's something I can tell you, Edgar, about security. Your best laid plans will fall victim to users trying to get around them when they're complicated. So implementing things like SSO actually, besides enhancing the convenience of your user base, they enhance the security of your organization because by making things more convenient for your users, they make it more likely those users will comply. And, when they only have to remember one password, that's actually a great thing. And when you tie that to the fact that you use one identity management system, get away from implementing passwords in other identity management systems. So if Active Directory is your identity management system, you want to use that as the source of authentication as much as possible. Remember, if you use, for instance, SQL native authentication for your SQL servers, or you have XYZ app and you create usernames and passwords in it, you're putting at risk your identities because now you're implementing these additional identity management systems. And they don't have the robustness of security as that core system that you use does. And you may end up with users that use the same password across them, even though you tell them not to do that. And now one of those is compromised, that XYZ application, and your main Active Directory credential is now compromised. So go ahead and implement SSO wherever you can, and definitely take advantage of MFA because, when we talk about the security triumvirate, right, something you know, something you have, and something you are, the best case scenario is all three. But certainly for each one you implement, you're going to improve the safety of your systems. We talked about with cybersecurity, MFA being a requirement. It's also becoming more and more of a requirement in organizations as they implement tactics and strategies to protect against current ransomware threats. David, back to you.
Okay. Dave wants to answer one question. We're going to squeeze it in. It comes from Aaron. How would you implement just enough access with only one IT professional in the department?
Well, great question for all of our small to mid-sized customers out there listening. And if you can do one thing today, one thing that'll just make a huge difference in your life, don't use your admin account as your daily driver. Segment your admin account from the one that you're checking your email on your desktop and things like that. have a separate administrative account to do administrative tasks, separate another account for workstation administrative access. I know it's multiple accounts to log into your infrastructure and do things, but you're really going to protect yourself. And the other thing is you can look at multi-factor authentication on your servers and your infrastructure. It'll make a real difference for you. All right, David, I'll hand it over to you for some closing thoughts.
Okay, well, great stuff. Thanks for providing that information and answering those questions, guys.